said. 10th Lady, read my lips. We do not give a damn if you or anyone else is offended by anything we say or do. John Corbett Morgan. After the raucous and rowdy press conference, the opening session of the negotiations the next day was almost anticlimactic. It more or less set the tone for the coming weeks. 5 days a week, the NVA delegation got their wake-up calls from the desk at 6 in the morning, switched on the coffee makers and the mini-bars for their morning caffeine blast, showered and shaved and cleaned their rooms, made their beds with fresh sheets provided by housekeeping, and put on their daily fresh dry-cleaned and pressed uniforms, which had been delivered the night before and scanned for bugs by Dr. Doom. They delivered their non-political personal trash to the elevator on a housekeeping cart, which was collected by a UN peacekeeper in a blue beret and taken away, no doubt to be pawed over by the FBI garbologists. Emily told Cody she was going to put some empty condom wrappers in her trash, and she was shushed and scolded by Captain Chenault, who told her not to fuck around in any sense of the term. At 7:30, they all trooped down to the Sockeye Grill, which was the restaurant Barrow and Jane Chenault had selected for their use, where a generous buffet containing every breakfast food known to man was laid out for them. When pressed, America could still put on the dog in the luxury and conspicuous consumption departments, even if millions of poor and elderly people across the country were sitting down to a breakfast of powdered egg substitute and cat food. The American staff military and any delegates who weren't having room service delivered to their suites congregated in the pump room, gleaming with gold and polished oak and red leather upholstery, for their own equally sumptuous breakfast buffet. Reporters were staked out in the Cascade Lounge, where the buffet was supplemented with a bar that was open 24 hours a day and led to episodes of drunken brawling. Sexual pawing and slurping in corners, stewed skinny dipping in the pools and fountains and the water trap on the golf course, vandalism and vomit among the Fourth Estate. Bibulous antics among the media personnel gave the peacekeepers and MPs their only real problems. They actually set aside one of the offices on the ground floor as a drunk tank for reporters. Each faction used separate stairs and elevators, and admission to the 3 restaurants and to the hotel floors was only for those with the appropriate color-coded ID cards, red, white, and blue for American delegation, shocking pink for the media, and blue, white, and green for the NVA. For some reason, those blue, white, and green ID cards clipped to their uniform shirt pockets or worn on chains around the volunteers' necks seemed to irritate the American negotiators and the media more than almost anything else with their implied equality. There were constant needling references to the green, white, and blue IDs from both sources and in media commentaries on the conference. The Swedish blue berets acted as escorts and traffic cops to keep the reporters away and avoid any accidental clashes and possible firefights in the lobby during transit. Everyone was nervous about the iron on the volunteers' hips. There were constant demands for the NVA delegates to be disarmed, and finally Barrow had to issue a direct order that any attempt to take away a volunteer's sidearm was to be regarded as an abrogation of the ceasefire and resisted with deadly force. Breakfast took about 45 minutes, and then the NVA went back upstairs and gathered in several team briefings to plan the day's activity. At 10 o'clock sharp, the NVA negotiating team for the day entered the hotel's main conference room, briefcases and laptops in hand, from one entrance, and the Americans entered from another. Prior to 10:22, before booming bombs and flying bullets had rendered the climate in Washington state unfriendly for capitalism, the Lewis and Clark had made a point of attracting major players in the corporate world for meetings, conventions, and retreats. The conference room was large and comfortable, equipped with every business and personal convenience, including private restrooms. These had been made unisex, one assigned to the NVA and one to the United States to prevent any friction through casual contact in the can. Little flip tags could be turned from the inside to show whether or not each john was currently occupied by male or female personnel of either faction. Looming over the long mahogany table was a large satellite television screen for video conferencing. On various occasions in the following weeks, everyone from Red Morehouse to members of the Army Council disguised in balaclavas, to the Canadian Prime Minister and the Secretary General of the UN, dropped in to make a virtual appearance. There were also frequent observers in the sessions themselves from a wide variety of international bodies and governments, including one session attended by Premier Komorowski while on a state visit to America. Komorowski and his entourage came and said little, pointedly avoiding the NVA delegation whom everyone knew that Russia was secretly aiding, although they did manage to clean the hotel out of vodka. Only 2 people were not present in the flesh or electronically. President Chelsea Clinton's face and voice were never seen on the screen, and neither was the old man, despite repeated demands by the NVA and despite the ease with which a satellite feed could have been arranged from his prison cell in Florence. They're holding him out to us like some kind of grand prize, in exchange for concessions, and then at the last minute they snatch him away, growled Barrow with a curse, on more than one occasion. The negotiating sessions took place on weekdays from 10 o'clock until 1 o'clock, with a 2-hour lunch break, which the team took back in the sockeye grill, and then the meetings resumed again at 3 for 2 more hours until 5 o'clock. After 5, everyone knocked off and went back up to their rooms to get stuck in on the day's accumulation of paperwork, writing of position papers, studying subcommittee minutes, writing press releases and sometimes doing media interviews, monitoring the news, and endless discussion and analysis of the day's session. Supper was eaten when and as people got hungry, either down in the sockeye on an a la carte basis, or else if there was a strategy session going hot and heavy, they ordered room service. Barrow tentatively grew to trust the room service and kitchen staff as time went by, and there was no sign of poison or drugs or excrement in the food. "They're rooting for us in the kitchen," Lisa Napolitano reported. "Apparently, the Zoggies are real assholes, rude and complaining, always finding fault with the food and the service, demanding specially cooked meals, so forth and so on. Plus they've got a rabbi down there and a special chef doing kosher meals for Galinsky and Weintraub and the Horowitzes and the other observant Jews, and the rabbi has to inspect and sign off on the whole kitchen every day to make sure it's pure and suitable to cook for the chosen ones, so that really frosts everybody's cookies on top of everything else. I always figured they'd take the kosher food racket too far," said McCausland complacently. "The media people are even worse, always drunk and feeling up the waitstaff of both sexes. We never complain, and we compliment them on their food and their service. Plus that $1,000 a week in tips General Barrow has me slip the kitchen staff. And our generous tipping policy in the sockeye has done wonders. If I were Senator Galinsky or Mr. Weintraub, I'd be more worried about finding something unpleasant in the food than I think we should be." Weekends were free, although that term was a misnomer, because every member of the team was always busy working on something to do with the conference or with presenting the Republic's position to the people of the world through media manipulation. On their part, the American primaries generally left Longview on the weekends and flew back to Washington, D.C., or wherever the mood struck them. On Sunday mornings would come the cable talk shows, where one or more of them would appear cursing and reviling the NVA delegates for intransigence, incompetence, ignorance, and wicked racism in general. That meant that Sunday afternoons were generally spent in retaliation by the NVA primaries, who did interviews with the reporters who showed themselves the least hostile and whose coverage most closely approached some kind of balance. Oddly enough, the one among them who shone in this regard, and who began to generate a kind of fan club among the reporters and viewers, was John Corbett Morgan. When he wasn't threatening bodily violence in the conference room, Morgan turned out to be a natural-born media talent, with a natural camera presence, a folksy raconteur with a pithy turn of phrase and a sharp country comment on every situation. "An evil Jed Clampett," one of the talking heads called him. "Hell, who knows?" chuckled Morgan. "I may go into politics once we get the Republic." The Sunday afternoon media counterstrikes in turn generally led to chilly Monday mornings, which lapsed into recrimination and abuse over what had been said on television by both sides the previous day. It became very hard to get anything done at all on a Monday, since Mondays were all about the Sunday news shows. Finally, in September, Seamus O'Connell was able to persuade the American delegate to stay the hell off the tube, and the NVA agreed to follow suit, which calmed things down a bit. The 5 primary Northwest American Republic negotiators were accompanied into the conference room by 1 aide each, who sat behind their principal at small desks and took notes, monitored the news, or did quick research on laptops as needed, as well as running any errands outside the room that needed running. In theory, they were the only ones who were supposed to leave the room during a formal session, but at one point or another during the sessions, virtually everyone except Stanhope, Barrow, and Oliver Lodge blew up and stormed out, including the moderator O'Connell, who once got so disgusted he cursed them all in Irish, went into the Cascade Lounge, demanded Guinness and Bushmills, and ended up saying some embarrassing things of his own to the comment, "Hungry media," to the effect that it would be to the ultimate benefit of humanity if the entire North American continent burned to the ground. Cody sat behind General Barrow. Reverend McCausland was accompanied by his wife Mabel, a quiet and neat woman whom Cody hadn't even realized was part of the delegation until he'd seen her get onto the copter that morning at Chehalis, and later seen her in the suite she shared with Barrow and her husband. She never said anything except to whisper to her husband maybe once during each session. The other 3 NVA primaries had a different aide every day so that everyone in the delegation would get a chance to sit in on the sessions, so sometimes Cody got to sit next to Nightshade, and they passed notes like kids in school. On one occasion, Howard Weintraub was ranting on about something, and he saw one of their notes and demanded that O'Connell confiscate it and read it out loud. With a shrug, Cody passed the note down and O'Connell examined it and read it out to the assembled conference and into the minutes of the meeting. Emily had written Howie's fly is open, and Cody had scrawled back, "Dead birds don't fall out of the nest." The Americans were accompanied by their own aides, usually a military officer for Brubaker, for Galinsky a goat-faced woman with a mustache described as her domestic partner, and several secretaries in suits took turns backing Lodge and Weintraub. Susan Horowitz, as Leah now called herself, always sat behind Secretary of State Stanhope with a yellow legal pad on her knee, expensively dressed to the nines and looking like she'd just come from the hairdresser, calm and cool and efficient and a little amused, taking the occasional note and showing a lot of leg. She and Cody ignored one another. All of the NVA delegates were in uniform except for the McCauslands. Mabel McCausland was invariably dressed neat as a pin, as if for church. Major McCausland again chose to wear a rumpled suit and carried no briefcase, just his Bible under his arm. "I have to admit, sir, the sight of that Bible freaks them out," admitted Gare. "I think they're scared you'll start preaching." "If they only knew, they'd be scared he'd start singing," replied Mabel McCausland. It seemed to Cody that was the longest sentence he'd ever heard her utter. On weekdays, the sessions would almost always begin with some complaint or other by the Americans about the behavior of the NVA and/or NDF during the previous 24 hours, involving alleged ceasefire violations, unkind remarks by NVA people around the homeland, acts of violence against non-whites, loyalists, race mixers, and homosexuals, and the party's habit of creeping annexation of real estate. On morning of August the 2nd, as they sat down across from one another for the first time, Barrow was surprised to hear Weintraub open with a formal protest over the fact that the fledgling Northwest Broadcasting Authority's television station in Centralia was running old episodes of Amos and Andy from the 1950s, which they'd found somewhere. "That's the uppermost thing on your minds as we begin an historic event like this?" Barrow asked in amazement. "You're upset about our telling nigger jokes?" "All right, that's another thing we need to get clear," snapped Jeanette Galinsky. "There are to be no racial slurs used in this room. You're not in some redneck honky-tonk in Alabama. During these meetings, you people are to conduct yourselves in a courteous and civilized manner." "Yes, Mommy dearest," said Robert Gare contritely, and from then on, Senator Galinsky had her official nickname. "You mean I can't call you a plug ugly kike bitch?" asked John Morgan innocently. "Who the hell do you think you are talking to me like that, you gonif? You schlumpf?" screamed the Galinsky woman. "I am a United States Senator." "Take Mommy dearest's point," said Barrow. "No racial slurs, plug ugly bitch is quite sufficient. And don't schlumpf." Things deteriorated from that point, and it took O'Connell an hour to get things back on track. That first day, and almost every day thereafter, the sessions periodically degenerated into carping sessions over the NVA's use of so-called ethnic and racial slurs, which Barrow insisted on as a point of principle. At a news conference he said, "For years now, white men and some women as well have been fired from their jobs, have had their children taken away and their families destroyed, have gone to prison and been tortured, and murdered simply for telling a racial or ethnic joke, or for displaying a Confederate flag or a tricolor bumper sticker on their car," he explained to the media in an impromptu session outside the conference room on one occasion. Zog has always sought to control white people's thoughts in Orwellian fashion, by punishing the speaking aloud of certain words and ideas. The purpose of hate speech laws is to make white people so afraid that they might accidentally utter forbidden racial speech, that they censor themselves in their own minds from so much as thinking forbidden racial thoughts. No more. From now on, we call a spade, literally. In the novel 1984, Winston Smith wrote in his journal that freedom means the right to say out loud that 2 + 2 = 4. As odd as it may sound, a large part of what we have been fighting for over the past 5 years has been for the right to say nigger. "But that word is offensive to African Americans," wailed a woman reporter in stunned disbelief. "Lady, read my lips," spoke up Morgan, who was standing beside Barrow on this occasion. "We do not give a damn if you or anyone else is offended by anything we say or do. I want to say nigger. I'm damned well gone say nigger. As long as I am carrying this iron on my hip and I am willing and able to use it to defend myself and my right to think and to speak as I choose against those who would deprive me of that right, I'm gon' say nigger all I want." Agitated media reporters that night recounted disturbing reports from all over North America of white people breaking out in spontaneous cheers, breaking out in bars and other places where these words were broadcast on television. The tone of the main meetings ranged from the icily correct to practically barroom brawl. O'Connell attended the sessions as nominal chair and made valiant but usually ineffective attempts to control and direct them, and stifle the more dangerous shouting matches before guns were drawn. These usually took place between John Corbett Morgan and Howard Weintraub, each whom clearly wanted the other dead, but sometimes between Morgan and Brubaker McCausland, and Weintraub over biblical subjects, Gare and Brubaker. And once Stepanov and Weintraub both blew up and cursed and railed at one another in Russian. Jeanette Galinsky had for some reason developed an almost frantic aversion to Jane Chenault, who did the daily media briefings for the NVA delegation, and went out of her way to call her the Shiksa and Blondie. The rest of the delegation retaliated by making sure the media got hold of Mommy Dearest, to her fury. Galinsky and Barrow had a couple of extremely cold and nasty exchanges, but the senator seemed completely terrified of Morgan, and of Andrei Stepanov as well, which was odd because Stepanov was generally the most continental and courtly NVA team. "Genetic memory of Cossacks," said Stepanov with a shrug. Whenever Emily Pastras was present in the conference room, Cody kept catching Susan Horowitz giving her a calculating once-over, and that bothered him. He mentioned this and Nightshade told him, "Yeah, I picked up on it. She takes this running joke about us being a hot item seriously. She's going to try something, and when she does I'll cut her." "Well, I don't know why she," fumbled Cody. "I can guess," said Emily, looking at him. "Forget about it. Now's not the time and place." Cody agreed and changed the subject. One major thing that was accomplished during the first week was the creation of the subcommittees, the important ones being the Territorial and Border Committee and the Prisoner Release Committee. Cody wasn't on either one, but Jane Chenault was on prisoners with a special brief to get as many Canadians sprung as she could, and Barrow himself headed the Boundary Committee on the northwest side, so Cody got to sit in on that. One which was actually much more productive and civil than the main conference since the American delegates were Stanhope and Lodge, both of who were firm and slippery negotiators but who at least didn't rant and rave, and who took the matter seriously. To Barrow's relief and astonishment, it was Stanhope who said, "Let's start from the premise that we're not going to worry about the outcome of the substantive negotiations, or what form of autonomy might apply in the parts of the United States we'll be discussing. Let's quantify rather than argue about how many terrorists can dance on the head of a pine in Spokane and how many in Redding, California. I think it's obvious, General Barrow, that you will want as much land as possible, while we wish to concede as little as possible. That being taken as a given, let's see what we can come up with, as if we're performing some academic exercise in demographic economy or political science. I'm amazed at how easy the border subcommittee is going, Barrow reported to one of the delegation's internal briefings, shaking his head in wonder. I can't understand it. I thought that this would be the main show itself, that they'd be argue and reject and quibble until the cows come home, that every square foot of land would be like pulling teeth. But they didn't bat an eye about the 3 basic states. They graciously accepted our concession of Alaska and threw us Wyoming as a consolation prize. You ever been to Wyoming, sir? Asked Gare. Now we're bobbing and weaving over how much of Montana and Northern California we get, said Barrow, shaking his head. I think Jeff Anderson is right. This has to be some kind of goal. They have to have something up their sleeve. Any progress at all on freeing any of Canada, sir? Asked Jane Chenault. Barrow sighed. Jane, I'm more sorry than I can say, but no, they won't even discuss it. They say they haven't got the authority to negotiate away someone else's country, and I have to admit they have a point. The Canadian government just refused yet again, point blank, to send even so much as an observer here, much less a plenipotentiary. Looks like that one glimpse of the Prime Minister on the big screen telling us to piss off is about all we're going to get. Comrade, the best I can tell you is that our neighbor to the north goes on this new country's permanent to-do list, and someday Canada will be free as well as us. But it doesn't look like it's going to happen here. Cody Brock was assigned to the Standard Subcommittee, which consisted of himself, Olaf Olafsson, and Lisa Napolitano, and some American bureaucrats whose main object seemed to be that the Northwest Republic didn't go on to the metric system. That's actually more important than it sounds, explained Red Morehouse to Cody in a phone briefing. It's an economic issue. Who will the Republic be importing most of its technical and mechanical goods from? The United States or Europe? Well, hopefully we'll be manufacturing them, not importing them, replied Cody. I agree, but let's not mention that to the Americans, shall we? What should we push for, sir? Asked Cody. As much as you can tell me on these phones? We're going to be getting a lot of new arrivals from Europe, fleeing their own unrestricted third world immigration, said Morehouse. We already are, in fact, mostly young men who want to fight. The NDF has 2 fledgling German divisions now, and 1 British, including a corps each of Anzacs and South Africans, and the French-speaking Charlemagne division is on the drawing board. My inclination is hold out for as much metric as you can get, but let them talk you back to miles instead of kilometers and Fahrenheit instead of Celsius, which is a better temperature scale anyway. This is so they can show some gain to match against our holding out on the substantive issues. It's a sideshow, but I think it's a damn good sign that they even want a standards agreement. It shows they're serious, and they're envisioning trade and economic relations with a new nation. In between the arguments, Barrow and Stanhope, and occasionally Barrow and Oliver Lodge, actually managed to conduct a passably civil dialogue on substantive issues, but not one very long on progress. Morehouse had been correct in his assessment of Oliver Lodge. When the man of big business did speak, he did so quietly, briefly, and to the point, and all the others shut up and deferred to him. They're stalling for time, Barrow told Morehouse in a phone conversation made through a scrambling attachment Doc Doom had cooked up, which they hoped worked. That's the only way I can figure it. But why? Time is on our side. Every day the NDF assumes command in more and more of the Pacific Northwest, and the homeland becomes more and more of a reality on the ground. What the hell are they playing at? Why don't they wind it up, one way or the other? Could it be you're reading too much into them? Asked Morehouse. Could it be that the United States really honestly does not have a plan for a situation like this? I've always believed that we always overestimated Zog's competency. Frank, these people have always thought maybe 10 minutes ahead, on a good day. Their entire style of government has been crisis management, staggering from crisis to crisis. Maybe they've finally reached a crisis that they just plain don't know how to handle. and they're just keeping the balls in the air waiting for the flying saucers to come down out of the sky and land on the White House lawn. What the sessions boiled down to was the Americans trying to browbeat, seduce, or bullshit the NVA into making concessions on just about every front, having to do with the substance of political and economic independence, and Barrow shooting them down every time and countering with demands for more prisoner release. Completely off his own bat, and drawing on his best legalese from his police and house-buying days, the night before coming down to Longview, Barrow had drawn up a simple 6-point document, which he had cleared with Morehouse beforehand: agreement for disengagement, mutual recognition, and non-belligerence between the United States of America and the Northwest American Republic. 1. The following plenipotentiary treaty between the United States of America and the Northwest American Republic shall be legally binding on both participatory governments from the date of signature by the delegations assembled at Longview, Washington, and unless and until full ratification by the participatory governments is specifically denied or rejected, shall have the force of international law. 3. The United States of America shall withdraw all military, paramilitary, law enforcement, administrative, and governmental forces from the territory of the Northwest American Republic within 14 days of the signing of this instrument, said territory to be determined by the duly assigned subcommittee of the conference now convened at Longview, Washington. 4. The signatory parties shall agree that no indemnification or compensation for loss and damages sustained by any and all persons or institutions during the hostilities leading to the independence of the Northwest American Republic shall be demanded, paid, or discussed, save by a joint commission of the two participatory governments, to be convened at a later date mutually agreed upon. 5. The participatory parties agree within 1 year of the signing of this instrument to establish a border commission to determine the final and recognized boundaries and frontiers of the Northwest American Republic. 6. The respective military and paramilitary forces of the two participatory governments shall maintain a complete ceasefire during the withdrawal phase of this agreement, and shall refrain from any and all acts of hostility towards one another during the period preceding ratification thereof. At the bottom of this document were signature blocks for the 5 NVA primary negotiators and the 5 primary American negotiators. Barrow had Emily print this document out in 2 copies on nice heavy creamy parchment and encased in a couple of document holders, 1 copy for them and 1 for the Americans, and all of the NVA negotiators signed both copies of the impromptu treaty and had the hotel's notary affix her seal to each signature. Then Barrow periodically shoved the papers under the Americans' noses and demanded they sign, to which they reacted like vampires confronted with a crucifix. A major problem was none of the NVA people being able to set foot outside the South Wing without getting mobbed by reporters wanting comments on everything, inside information on what was going on in the conference meetings, and in-depth interviews of the portrait of a hater kind. The stress and the cabin fever started to grow almost immediately. Barrow told his people, "Look, comrades, we're shut in together, and as comfortable as these surroundings are, we're going to start getting on one another's nerves. Be aware of it. Be aware of what's causing it. Learn not to sweat the little stuff. And let's make an agreement not to start snapping and crabbing at one another. This is a great adventure and something you're going to tell your grandchildren about. Make a decision that you're going to enjoy it." In August, when the weather was still warm, the hotel agreed to work out a schedule with the peacekeepers between the two sides governing the use of the facilities such as the golf course, the tennis courts, the fitness room and sauna, and the outdoor and indoor swimming pools, but the media proved impossible to restrain or interdict, stalking the NVA delegates with telephoto lenses and trying to phone them and sneak into the rooms. On several occasions, reporters were nearly shot by volunteers on guard duty on their floor, and on one occasion, Dr. Doom, of all people, lost his temper with one blousy news hen and jabbed her with a homemade electric cattle prod of his own design he had taken to carrying. One supermarket tabloid paid a paparazzi photographer $100,000 for a surreptitious picture of Jane Chenault in a swimsuit. by the supposedly closed outdoor pool, which the photographer had admittedly taken at some risk to life and limb. "That's twice my domestic terrorist bounty, eh?" she protested indignantly, waving the offending newspaper in a team meeting. It gets worse, Jane," said Barrow sympathetically. "According to a talk I had with Red this morning, a national so-called sophisticated men's magazine is offering $250,000 for pictures of you or Lisa or Emily in the nude." "You," said Cody, staring at Nightshade in disgust and receiving a one-finger salute in return. "Not me?" asked Mabel McCausland. "I don't know whether to be pleased or insulted." "My understanding is that the offer applies as well, Ms. Horowitz and some of the American secretaries, and the female hotel staff. They want to do a spread called Ladies of Longview. For $250,000, Leah will strip off in a heartbeat," said Cody sourly. Corby Morgan was scowling in rage. "Frank, you sure it wouldn't be a good idea to just say to hell with all this and go back to blowing these bastards' brains out?" "I think this may go beyond ordinary tabloid sleaze," Barrow told them. "It may be some kind of government plot to cause us embarrassment, throw us off, make us lose our cool. I think a lot of you gals, and I am going to be very, very angry indeed if any of you are humiliated in such a manner. John C., I think we can find some way to make it clear to those reptiles that these particular ladies of Longview have a lot of friends on the outside, and if anything of the kind happens, the parties responsible aren't going to be around long enough to spend that 250 G's. "I'm on it," said Morgan. "Do you think they'd go so far as to bug our bathrooms and showers, sir?" asked Jane Chenault wearily. "Stanhope and Lodge assure me privately that the bathrooms aren't bugged or monitored, that their people do have that much decency," replied Barrow. "Do they? I don't know. We've been fighting these people for 5 years. They are capable of murder and torture in every form, and I have never noted any particular signs of any decency at all. I don't think they'd stick at watching us on the crapper. But to be frank, other than trust in Dr. Doom's electronic wizardry, there's just not too much we can do about it." Whether Nightshade was present or not in the sessions, if Cody had his laptop, which he usually did, they spent a lot of time instant messaging one another. The Federals never objected to this practice, so the two of them assumed that the IMS were bugged and made it a point to include various scatological and libelous comments about the enemy negotiators. Cody and Nightshade were actually well known around the hotel because, to their chagrin, the media picked up on the two of them almost immediately. It seemed that FBI intelligence had finally caught up with them, put 2 and 2 together regarding Emily's alleged kidnapping on Capitol Hill in June, updated their files, and passed the information on to their tame journalists. A week after the conference began, Cody and Emily came into the morning briefing and found everyone poring over copies of the latest Newsweek magazine. "Hey, Em, you're a cover girl now," a grinning Doc Doom told her. There was with a blow-up photo of the two of them in uniform on the cover of the magazine, taken with a telephoto lens as they debarked down the helicopter ramp on the first day, with the headline, "The NVA's Killer Kids." Inside, the cover story was headed "Natural-Born Killers," with more photos of them from the press conference, labeled "Deadly Nightshade and Wild Bill." "Wild Bill?" asked Lieutenant Waters. "That's actually my name," said Cody. "William Cody Brock. My dad liked cowboys. Wait until they pick up on Dr. Doom." "I'd rather they didn't," said Barrow in some irritation. "Doc needs to stay beneath the radar." The main story in Newsweek featured a not wholly inaccurate account of the country Joe Krajewski hit, a somewhat less accurate retelling of the events in Eastgate Mall, and an almost totally fabricated account of Cody's stabbing of Larry Saperstein. It also mentioned that Emily Pastras's grandmother had been euthanized under the Senior Citizens Quality of Life Act. This is like Mark Twain said, "I could go over this story with a divining rod and never find myself. No doubt I have Leah Susan to thank for this," sighed Cody. He turned to Nightshade. "I'm sorry, comrade. Looks like you got caught in a shitstorm aimed at me." "Well, Mom had to find out sometime," said Emily with a shrug. "I suppose I'd better call her." Yeah, I think so," agreed Cody. When Emily went out of the room to use the phone in the hall, he followed her. "Em, I didn't know about your grandmother. I'm sorry." "Hey, I told you once. I have a story like everyone else," she said with a shrug. "I don't want to pry and it's none of my business, but how did that happen?" asked Cody. "You guys were rich. After my father died, I had a stepfather too for about a year," said Emily in a dead voice. "No, just a sorry white bastard. And no, he didn't do to me what I think those Jew girls did to you. He wasn't into nookie, he was into money. Grandma got a big chunk of my father's estate, and stepdaddy wanted to speed up the process of my mother inheriting it. We could never prove anything, but Grandma went into the hospital for hip surgery, and 48 hours later a certain Dr. Singh gives her the hot shot. They said it was a mistake in the paperwork. The silly doc was new in the country and had trouble with his English, so he mistook her for some old woman who was a charity patient on the next ward, the one he was supposed to kill. An error, I presume, he rectified. We got a really nice letter of apology from the hospital. My mom found some funny calls on stepdaddy's cell phone bill to Singh's private number on the 2 days in question. She's not a total idiot. She threw the son of a bitch out and told him if he kicked up a fuss she'd call the cops and the news media. Exit stepdaddy. I'm sorry. Don't be, she said, looking at him. When I knew Grandma was gone, that this horrible unfeeling monster had simply ground up her bones like she was so much garbage, that was when I knew the world had to change. I did an archive search on the internet until I found a 7-year-old party email address in an old chat room that by accident more than anything else was still valid. By the grace of God, I was able to hook up with the NVA. Deadly Nightshade was born, and the rest, as they say, is history. The NVA delegation weren't imprisoned. There was in fact a trickle of travel back and forth between the volunteers in the hotel and the outside world, via special helicopter runs under the aegis of the UN peacekeepers. Barrow was allowed to send messengers out, and also to receive couriers from the Army Council. About 2 weeks after the press conference, wherein the Los Angeles Times reporter had let the Aslan cat out of the bag, they received a visit from now Captain Nigel Moore of SS Military Intelligence. The NVA delegates had taken to holding conferences in the capacious bathrooms of the suites, trusting at least to a limited degree in. The Secretary of State's promised that they were not electronically monitored since they didn't really have any other choice. After Moore's arrival, the primaries assembled for one of these special hot tub sessions, and Cody was allowed to squeeze in. Captain Moore gave his presentation standing in the shower, to a packed John. "Right," said Moore. "Here's what we've been able to piece together. As most of you are probably aware, the Mexicans have been trying to get the American Southwest back ever since the end of the Mexican-American War of the 1840s. For almost a century it never went anywhere, despite a few incidents such as Pancho Villa raiding into Texas and New Mexico, so forth and so on. But then in the 1950s, American agriculture began to be transformed, from white-owned family farms and ranches into what is now known as agribusiness, and that created a huge demand for cheap labor at the very moment when the American economy was improving, and the availability of the old-style poor white Okies who used to pick all the fruit and the lettuce and whatnot dried up. Understandable, I suppose. No one wants their kids to be doing stoop labor in the fields when they could be going to college on the GI Bill and working in an air-conditioned office, but since somebody has to do the stooping, it created the beginning of the immigration crisis. You all know what happened over the next 70 years, as the United States ceased to enforce its immigration laws and large parts of the North American continent became part of the Third World due to massive and unchecked immigration. The bulk of that immigration was Hispanic and mestizo. The feds stopped even trying to send them back. The cities became huge barrios, and by modern times, huge sections of the Southwest had become de facto part of Mexico with the added advantage of American welfare benefits. The political move for a separate Hispanic nation in the Southwest was an entirely logical outgrowth of this capitalist policy, and it actually predates our own independence movement here in the Northwest. The Mexicans call the territory that they claim Aztlan, since according to their legends, the Aztecs were originally a nomadic people who came from that part of North America. The Aztlan movement has been increasing in strength and influence for many years, especially since Hispanic politicians began to get elected and essentially take over first local and then state-level governments, and the judiciary in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and especially California, as well as the southern half of Florida. Spanish has replaced English as the primary language in most of those areas now, the language of the courts and legal documents, the street signs, so forth and so on. The Frente de la Raza eventually became an umbrella group for all the various disparate elements that wanted independence from the United States under some kind of condominium arrangement which would still give them access to the American welfare and medical systems. A Covington. They want to have their cake and eat it too, said Barrow. Precisely, agreed Jack Flash. And they may well get it. Actually, a system of the sort has long since been put in place since Bush I, under the guise of NAFTA. Mexicans have been, for all practical purposes, a kind of honorary American since the 1980s. But in the past 5 years, with white men actually fighting for a nation of their own in the Northwest, the demand for a Hispanic nation in the Southwest has reached a point where Zog simply can't ignore it anymore. From what we can gather, their own demographics and economics people told the federal government a long time ago that the Hispanification of the Southwest had progressed beyond the point where it could be reversed, and that some kind of formalization of the Hispanic character of at least 5 states was inevitable. The federal government reacted in the same way they always react to bad news. At first, they classified all the reports top secret and hid them away. Then, when the evidence of the Southwest's changing demographics became too public to ignore and they could no longer bury the issue, they tried to spin it and co-opt the Mexicans into the system by giving them an increasingly large slice of the American pie, which worked for a time. Then we came along, and at some point it became obvious that the Northwest insurrection could not be suppressed either, and that one way or the other the hated gringos were going to get a slice of America back. Needless to say, the Spics have now ratcheted up their own demands for independence from Washington, D.C., although not from the federal gravy train, using the FDLR as the political vehicle. Apparently the rumors of this coming conference here at Longview were afloat some months around the water coolers in D.C. before we ever knew of it. Several months ago, a coalition of Hispanic politicians more or less forced their way into the appropriate offices and told the Federals flat out that if the evil gringos of the Northwest got a country of their own in North America, then they were damned well getting a country of their own. Now bear in mind that we've been forced to patch all this out with a great deal of speculation. Once we were tipped off by that odd question from Ramirez. I think that may be one of the reasons why we're getting this odd deer-in-the-headlights reaction from the Americans, said Barrow. Crunch time has finally come, and the United States is getting hit from all sides. I honestly don't think they can wrap their minds around human beings who are motivated by anything other than their own self-interest. It's like we really don't speak the same language. So all of this affects us how? Prompted McCausland. The corporate faction within the American power structure has apparently decided that it is time to cut their losses and come to some sort of economic and business arrangement with both white and Hispanic separatism, so long as the multinationals continue to exercise looting rights over both the Southwest and Northwest. Their dedication to the old manifest destiny idea as to how the North American continent absolutely must be united under one empire has been replaced by economic multinationalism. Hillary Clinton wants one more stint in the White House, and she has negotiated a deal with them. She will instruct her daughter to sign off on whatever treaty comes out of this conference, and go along with the creation of some kind of Hispanic NAFTA land or whatever in the Southwest as well, in exchange for a Supreme Court decision declaring the 24th Amendment to the Constitution invalid. She already has a congressional resolution to that effect, but since she doesn't want to go through the constitutionally mandated process of approval by the states, so she wants a Supreme Court declaration, as well as an additional fig leaf when she goes for a third term. This decision will be rendered on a test case she has had one of her flunkies file in New York State, and which is now working its way through the judicial system. That will allow her to run again, and with conservative white votes and conservative Hispanic votes as well eliminated, she's pretty much certain to win. In essence, the red state or corpos have agreed to cut their own electoral base out from under them in order to save money, and Hillary is on board as well because she would rather preside over a rump segment of the USA one more time than finally admit the baby boomers' time has passed. Which is one of the more peculiar episodes I've come across in a lifetime of studying political science, but it seems to me that everyone in power has pretty much decided that the old ways are obsolete, and it's time to flush them anyway. However, for obvious reasons, this deal is a bit too cynical for public consumption, and she doesn't want it coming out. Hence their consternation when that Spanish reporter asked the question in the press conference. "So, you're telling us that both factions have come here to Longview with the full intention of actually letting us go?" asked Barrow incredulously. "Oh, it's much more complex than that," said Moore. "For one thing, the Zionist faction of the American power structure is fighting the breakup of the continent tooth and nail, as witness Mr. Weintraub's unilateral attempt to create biblical death squads as a counter-revolutionary force against us. For another thing, even the Corpos and Hillary have no intention at all of letting us go in the economic sense. They fully intend to hang on to our Northwest timber, our minerals and ore deposits, what coal and petroleum we have, our cattle and wheat and protein crops, our commercial fishing, our rivers with their hydroelectric potential, our manufacturing and industry, our deep water ports, and our water resources that they want to transfer to the parched Southwest that the Mexicans have ruined. Alaska has oil, and there's no way in hell we're getting that. But it never rains, but it pours. In addition to all of the problems involved in the breaking up of the Continental Empire, they face cataclysm overseas. Israel is about to go down, said Barrow. Israel is about to go down, agreed Moore. There's no doubt the Arab armies are massing once again. This time they're trained and battle-hardened by 3 generations of war. They're armed with everything up to and including nuclear weapons. There are millions of them. And this time the rest of the world has decided at long last to stand aside and let nature take its course regarding the great Zionist experiment. The only hope for Israel's survival is a full-court press American military intervention, with American ground troops taking on the entire Muslim world and maybe in the end the Russians and Chinese as well. The Protestant evangelicals may yet get their Armageddon, only it won't make Jesus come back. No disrespect, Major McCausland. Depending on how deeply America gets involved, it will only unleash hell on earth. We need to get out of it. No offense taken, Captain, said McCausland. Christian identity has always taken the view that the Armageddon referred to in the Bible was symbolic for the destruction of the Adamic race, the white peoples of the earth, by the forces of Satan, the Jews. Red state or blue state, the Zionists have an iron grip on both. The great Middle Eastern oil empire begun under Bush II has turned out to be a disaster, economic and social and military, and the Jews are using every trick in their playbook to hang on to their effective control of America's Israel-first foreign policy, controlling interests in major corporations, interlocking directorates on every board, control of the media, control of Congress, infiltration of the intelligence agencies and every level of government, control of the money supply through the Federal Reserve, late great planet Earthery, among the peasantry's evangelical sects, and in some cases good old-fashioned sexual entrapment of key American influentials through a regiment of Monica Lewinskys and Susan Horowitzes, plus naked violence of the kind Mr. Regenthal and his little chapel were planning. The Jews are frantic, and I imagine men like Oliver Lodge and Walter Stanhope are pulling their hair out in private. They are watching the whole world they have grown up in and served all their lives fall apart before their very eyes. So, Captain, if I understand what you're saying here, said Barrow slowly, I am saying, General, that the United States of America is reeling, on the ropes, on the verge of collapse, said Moore with a grin. This is their last attempt to salvage something out of a situation that has been rendered completely untenable. Oh, I'm sure they still have some nasty tricks up their sleeves, but anything they threaten is just bluff. You comrades can get our republic, if you will simply stay strong, keep your eye on the prize, and continue saying no until they hear it and accept it. Moore had to go back to Olympia that night, but before he left, he had a quick supper in the Sockeye Grill with Cody and Nightshade, and brought them up to date on their old company. He also told them, I'm happy to be able to report that Kelly Shipman and her family appear to have decided to remain in the Republic. Cody picked up on the fact that this meant Moore had seen Kelly recently, but he didn't pursue the matter. August became September. While the song of the Jabberwock went on, in the corridors of the Lewis and Clark Hotel, outside the conference in the real world, the party and the newly christened Northwest Defense Force were quickly and efficiently assembling the form and apparatus of the coming state. Barrow and Morehouse estimated that at any given moment during the War of Independence, there had been possibly 2,000 volunteers. on active service throughout the homeland and elsewhere, with maybe twice as many supporting personnel, active sympathizers, and assets. This force of around 6,000 irregulars had effectively tied down and baffled over 1 million federal troops, Marines, FBI, FATPOs, Homeland Security operatives, Secret Service, National Guard, State Police and Highway Patrol, local police, prison guards, bureaucrats and administrators, and forced the government that employed them to the conference table. In the purely military sense, the accomplishment of the NVA was stunning and impressive. Within the first month of open recruiting for the Northwest Defense Force, there were 50,000 men and women under arms in the fledgling Republic's forces. Barracks, training depots, and fortified positions were springing up all over the Northwest, often side by side and riding herd on the Federals in their own installations, including a ring of rebel positions in the streets, buildings, and woodlands around Fort Lewis. By the end of September, there were 100,000 NDF troops and a newly born Navy and Air Force. The Navy consisted of yachts and fishing vessels and tugboats hastily armed and transformed into gunboats and torpedo boats, with homemade weaponry almost as dangerous to the sailors as their opponents. The Air Force was a motley of chopped aircraft ranging from captured American helicopter gunships to jet airliners converted into bombers to small private planes with machine H.A. Covington guns rigged to fire through their propellers like World War I biplanes. There was also one B-52 which was seized by a team of SS commandos, plus a squadron of microlights attached to infantry units and used for close-in reconnaissance. Given the chance to do so with the full social approval, which his 20th century-bred psyche craved above all else, the white man was once again responding to the ancient call to arms. The pioneers had done their job. Civil administration was appearing in most of the small towns and counties outside the 6 or 7 main metropolitan areas still held by the Americans. Local police in hundreds, and then thousands, were changing sides and putting on the khaki uniform of the new Northwest Civil Guard, a nationwide paramilitary police force designated to handle routine law enforcement, crime detection, and community protection duties. Many of the men who a month before had been on the opposite side and potential targets for NVA bombs and bullets were now taking the oath of loyalty to the Republic and going back on their old beats. Tricolor flags now flew over police stations, fire stations, city halls, post offices, and government offices. Black-robed federal and state judges, the few who were left, were fleeing from the Pacific Northwest like rats leaving a sinking ship, and they were being replaced on their benches by locally elected members of the community who sat on the bench dressed like everyone else and who knew little of law but much of justice. In some cases, these new judges had nothing in front of them but the Bible and/or a copy of the old United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights, Founding Fathers version, yet they managed just fine and to the satisfaction of the communities they served. Courthouses were cleaned out, and massive bonfires of old tax records, civil lawsuits, and criminal cases involving the oppression of the weak by the strong went up in smoke and flame to the starry northwest sky. Lawyers were being hunted down and killed like plague rats. Prisons were broken open, including the hellhole at Walla Walla. Cody was notified that his father had been freed, but reluctantly decided that he did not want to call him or conduct a conversation with him on a telephone circuit that was certainly tapped by the Federals. "That's my private business," he told Barrow when the latter offered to arrange a phone conference. "Zog had already had entirely too much to do with my family, and I'm not letting them have anything more to do with me and mine. We've waited for 10 years and we can wait a bit longer, so I can meet my dad when we're both free men." Land was being redistributed out of the hands of the multinational corporations and developers, and being returned to farmers, foreclosed. Homes returned to their owners, and confiscated wealth in every form returned to the people who had created it. Nursing homes full of sick and elderly white people were opened, and their tormented residents heaped up with blankets, medicine, clothing, decent mattresses, and mountains of delicious real food instead of the slop they had been fed by America as local residents. Formed volunteer duty rosters to care for them, while the Nigerian and Filipino orderlies who had tortured and abused their elderly white patients were chased down the street and lynched, or else taken for rides out into the woods from which they never returned. The ceasefire was a joke. Every day there were shooting incidents between federal forces and the NDF, or between the impromptu local militias which had sprung up to take back what was theirs. Some of these amounted to Iraq-style pitched battles with mortars and artillery and tanks. On the Labor Day weekend, the NDF moved in on Seattle, a few thousand men commanded by General Robert DeBella of the newly established Army of the Puget Sound. In 5 days of pitched fighting, the rebels drove the Federals into 4 major pockets around the city from which they were evacuated by helicopter to Fort Lewis. The city which had once convicted the men of the order was now Aryan, and the Republic established a temporary capital in Olympia by way of thumbing their noses at the American garrison in Fort Lewis. Portland was a different story. It was the only major pocket of American control where the former rulers seemed determined to make a stand of it. The city there was more compact and had always been more tightly controlled by the Federals. By concentrating all of the remaining FATPO forces there as well as Ranger and Marine units, and setting up mini-posts on a block-by-block basis to virtually lock down the whole town, the intransigent American commander, USMC General Delmar Partman, was able to force the NDF out of the city by the first week in September. The rebels withdrew north of the Columbia River, and the newly designated 1st Corps of Army of the Columbia commanded by SS General Carter Wingfield began to concentrate in Vancouver, Washington. A 2nd Corps commanded by Generals Billy Basquine and Phil McDevitt moved up from southern Oregon and northern California and positioned itself in the environs of Salem. Both corps were small, enthusiastic with sky-high morale, sketchily uniformed, hastily trained and patchily armed. Some units were carrying the Russian Kalashnikov, and some captured American M16 seconds. They were light on armor and heavy weapons. On the evening of September the 10th, the first cool night that heralded the coming autumn, the NVA delegates at Longview gathered on their balconies and looked to the southeast, where they heard low rumbling. H. Covington, like thunder and flashes of light low in the sky like some subdued aurora borealis. "Those are 155 millimeters coming from Portland," said Barrow grimly. "CNN says that Partman has decided he wants to get our people to move back from the north bank of the river. Our own intelligence tells me that Partman has repeatedly demanded permission to blow up the interstate highway bridges that cross the Columbia River, but the White House won't let him do it. That would cut off Washington from the rest of the West Coast, which might help us instead of them, and besides, they still don't want to admit that this is a full-scale war now." Yet the negotiations at Longview still dragged on, with the daily quibbling over minor incidents on the outside that neither side really had any control over, the constant hair-splitting over things like the metric system and customs and tariffs, the slow release of prisoners that was like pulling teeth. The Americans had finally countered the NAR, delegation's simple 6-point program with a lengthy printed draft of their own, comprising 140 separate articles, and enough preambles, codicils, commentaries, and fine print to choke a horse. On the night of October the 21st, the eve of the anniversary of the Coeur d'Alene uprising 5 years before, Barrow was poring over this document trying to make some sense out of it. It was around midnight, and there was one of the many ongoing bull sessions among the delegates taking place in his suite. The air conditioner was rumbling on low below the window, but this far into autumn it was functioning as a heater and blowing warm air. "I don't get these people, I really don't," said Barrow, throwing down the multi-page American draft proposal. "I honestly can't tell if they really have a plan, if they're deliberately playing for time, or whether they're just totally clueless and stalling because it's the only thing they can think of to do. What the hell is so hard about, 'You have 14 days to get the hell out and leave us alone thereafter'? We speak English to them, and they respond with gibberish. 'You guys have looked this mess over?' he asked, pointing to the document. They all nodded wearily. 'It took them 2 months to come up with even this much?' asked Gare plaintively. They had now been in the Lewis and Clark Hotel for 2.5 months, and most of them had not been off the hotel grounds during that time. Luxury accommodation or not, it was getting very old. Exciting events were taking place outside the conference that everyone wanted to be part of, and the strain was starting to tell. On several occasions, Barrow had been compelled to bring the negotiating sessions to a close prematurely, because he had spotted the warning signs and he was afraid John Corbett Morgan was going to kill someone, most likely Weintraub. "It's just a goddamn stall," said Morgan. They ain't got nothing in their hand, and they just want to keep on bluffing and hope something will turn up that helps them out. No, said McCausland meditatively. I don't get that feel. These are subtle people, comrades. Subtle as the serpent. They do nothing without reason. There's something in there in that sea of sand. Something they want. But what? I think I may know, sir. The door opened and Nightshade entered the room. Cody noticed she was wearing a gray sweatsuit and sweatband on her head and her battered old running shoes instead of her uniform. She pointed to the walls and cupped her hand to her ear. Doc Doom did a sweep today, and he swears it's clean since Jack caught that one peacekeeper they'd bribed coming in here, said Barrow. He's got some kind of device attached to the electric motor in the HVAC unit that he says throws off some kind of subsonic tone that will mess up any convectional mics, which is why we're running the heater. Say what you need to say, just discreetly, if you get my drift. Check out Articles 83 through 85, sir, she said. I'm not sure what, but there's something buried in there. They're hoping we don't notice. Okay, so exactly what are sections 83 through 85? Asked Barrow. Let's take a look. He pored over the document on the table before him until he found the relevant sections. Then he read them. After he read them, he started cursing in a low and dispassionate monotone. Oh, yeah. Suddenly I see why our Mr. Lodge is so keen on this new proposal of theirs. I think the dog has finally shown his teeth and gone for the bone, comrades. Sections 83, 84, and 85 deal with what most people would consider to be dry economic issues. Section 83 creates a so-called free trade condominium between the Republic and the United States, which denies the Republic the right to impose any export or import tariff on goods moving between the two countries, whereas the United States may impose tariffs and customs on non-U.S. goods coming in and Republic exports going out. In essence, as far as actual trade goes, we would still be part of the United States and the Americans get a blank check on all our natural resources, including the right to ship them out of the country regardless of whether we need them or not, and probably use our own materials against us in some way. It was the South objecting to that very arrangement with regard to cotton exports and European manufactured imports that actually caused the Civil War, never mind all that bullshit about slavery, pointed out Stepanov. It would appear that the buccaneer capitalists of Boston have learned nothing in the past 200 years. H. Covington. Section 84 has to do with corporate law, continued a bemused Barrow. We're supposed to recognize American corporations as legal entities, safeguard their property, and give them the same tax breaks and the same rights they have in the U.S. In other words, virtual immunity from the law or regulation by the Aryan state. So we're supposed to be just like some South American banana republic? Asked Gare, scandalized. Hell, I imagine one of those corporations will even be United Fruit, looking to take our apples and blueberries. Article 85 is the real kicker. Barrow told them it deals with so-called currency union. Stripped of all its verbiage, if we sign this thing, the Republic gives up the right to issue our own money. We specifically renounce the gold standard and any kind of trade, credit system not utilized by the United States, and we agree to use the U.S. dollar as our currency, that is those private Federal Reserve notes issued by the Jews. Essentially, what these articles do is reduce us to an economic colony of the United States, no better off, and most likely a good deal worse off than we were before. We are even obligated to pay back all outstanding federal loans and treasury bills and bond issues, so forth and so on. The kikes have walked off with the money years ago, and we have to pay off their paper? We start our existence as a nation carrying trillions of dollars in usury debt to the international bankers? No. Not happening, Hebees. Any sovereign Aryan nation is supposed to allow the Federal Reserve to create and control our money supply? Asked Gare incredulously. Oh my God, the Federal Reserve is the first thing a neophyte right-wing crank of old used to learn about when he officially entered the lunatic fringe. What breathtaking arrogance. This is Lodge, of course, said Stepanov. This will be his input. I think you need to see him privately tomorrow, Frank. They've jerked us around long enough. Now we know what they want. They think they'll give us our flag and our own little puppet government, while they take everything of value in the Northwest as they have always done. I would be willing to wager that if we agreed to these stipulations of his in some kind of side treaty or addendum, hopefully secret, we would get their signatures on our own 6 points and be out of here by tomorrow night with the Republic in our pockets. You're seriously suggesting that we agree to let these corporate Jews in all but name use our new country as a teat to be milked? Demanded Gare. No, I am suggesting that we make such an agreement to bring this overly long process to an end. Get on with the building of a new all-white world, and then when time and place shall serve, we tear it up and throw it in their faces, said Stepanov. We slap any customs dues we want on anything we want. We kick their kosher corporations out of the Northwest, and we print 100 billion of our own dollars with Adolf Hitler's picture on every banknote, and back every penny of it in precious metal, even if we have to really kidnap Jews and pull out their gold fillings. These pushcart peddling swindlers have lied to our people how many times down through the past 2,000 years? Surely we are morally justified in turning the tables on them just this once? Which would then give them every valid excuse to say we'd broken our word and tear up the main treaty as well, pointed out Barrow. Do you seriously think they intend to honor it any longer than is convenient for them, no matter what they promise? Demanded Stepanov. Do you think that as soon as the pressure is off, the United States won't be back in here, invading us, trying to take our country back and enslave us again as soon as they think they can win? Granted, said Barrow. I already know that the very first thing we're going to have to do is to build a military to defend what we've won, and that for the next 2 generations at least every able-bodied man will have to spend a large part of his adult life in the army just to keep these monkeys off our backs. I think we all understand that what we're negotiating here isn't a treaty, it's merely a truce that the Americans are giving us because they have no choice, and that they will hate us forever for forcing them to do so. But I don't want our country to be born in an act of deceit, my friends. Remember the words of Marcus Aurelius. If it is not true, do not say it. If it is not right, do not do it. Yes, these people will break their word at the first expedient moment. Well, we're not Jews. We're better men than they are, and we're damned well going to act like it. I think you're right, Lodge is the man to see. So far I've kept to the diplomatic protocols and not tried to get any of them off in a corner besides that one meeting with Stanhope the day we arrived. I'm going to go outside the box tomorrow and ask to see Lodge alone. Nightshade leaned down and whispered in Barrow's ear for about 10 seconds. He nodded and tore a strip of paper off a yellow legal pad and began scribbling on it. I agree, said McCausland. The Republic must be founded in righteousness. Suppose we split the difference, General? Asked Gare. No phony treaties or lies, but hey, this is supposed to be a conference of diplomats, so why not be diplomatic? Tell Lodge we understand his concerns and that us poor ignorant rednecks just ain't got no idea how to run an economy, like we didn't have the example of the Third Reich in front of us for a Covington blueprint, and we're going to need the help of him and his Boston Brahmin buddies on the board of directors. But can. Do we talk about all that later, because we sure are getting tired of this hotel food and we'd all like to go home, right? Blah blah blah, you get the idea. See if you can swing Lodge around to our side by promising him a pig and a poke. Okay, maybe that's not up to Marcus Aurelius standards, but you can't deal with Jews without at least a little deception. There is the old saying about using a long spoon if you must sup with the devil, agreed McCausland. Barrow handed the note to Emily, who walked up to Cody and gave it to him. He looked at what Barrow had written. It said, "Go with Nightshade and do what she says." She leaned over and whispered, "Go change into civvies. Something light and disposable like this if you've got it. Then meet me in the smoke hole." Cody got up, went into his own bedroom, and changed out of his uniform into an old pair of jeans, a t-shirt, and a well-worn pair of Doc Martens he'd kept from his street kid days on Pioneer Square. He tore up the note and flushed it, stuck his backup pistol in the clip holster in his back, then walked out of the room through the NVA people who were still discussing Barrow's projected economic throwdown with Oliver Lodge. All of them had seen Barrow write the note and now saw Cody leave, and all of them studiously ignored it. He went out to what had become an unofficial outdoor smoking area for those who shared rooms with non-smokers, a couple of chairs set against the wall by the vending machines on the outdoor landing. Nightshade was there puffing away. He saluted her. "Lieutenant Brock reporting for duty, ma'am. Smoking now? Those things will kill you." "Yeah, well, you get to inhale," she said, standing up and tossing the cigarette. She pulled him against her and shoved him against the wall. She pushed her face into his and kissed him. "Are you nuts?" he whispered. "There's no place more exposed and more likely we're under surveillance than here. We're in full view of that corner room in the East Wing, and you know damned well that media wing or not, the feds have an eye and an ear in there. Yes, idiot child, I know, which is why we're out here, so they get a good look at us, she whispered back into his ear, gently biting it. Come on, grab my butt and act like you're into the wild thing. I know what I'm doing. Cody slid one hand under her sweatshirt and cupped her head and bunched her hair in his other. Ooh baby, so forth and so on, he said while she nuzzled him, his hand on her head making it look even more from a distance like they were making out. Okay, I need your help on something, and I warn you this may be kind of rough for you, she said in a low voice. You know I talked to McGrew before we left Centralia, and he gave me a job to do? I was doing it, and there's been a little glitch. How little? He said, kissing her closed eyes and tongue-lapping her ear. I'm going to show you. We're going to give each other a couple of hickeys, then we're going back inside so federal surveillance assumes we're going to hit the sack in one of the rooms. That tabloid shit helps, since everyone thinks we're Bonnie and Clyde already. Then I'm going to take you somewhere. All of this assuming Doc is right and the floor is clear of cameras and the feds don't see us running around out of the sack, Cody reminded her. Moan, gasp, oog and aarg, etc. While you're under there, you know that bra isn't glued on, she said. Whatever camera they've got recording us can't see what I do under your sweatshirt, he said, crushing her to him. Screw the camera, she asked. Hickey time. Do we really have to get that realistic? He complained. Apparently they did. After the said lip action, she giggled fulsomely, took him by the hand and dragged him back inside. Okay, whoever was watching, be they Phoebe or reporter, will figure that we're now looking for an empty room, she said. Joking aside, they won't expect to see us out and about for a while, and we can account for a couple of hours or more of absence if we have to. Come on. She led him down to one end of the corridor and into what looked like an old laundry room, lined with stainless steel rod shelving and various sanitary and housekeeping supplies. She turned on the overhead light and went to the end of the room, where she pulled aside one of the shelving units, which rolled quietly on oiled casters, exposing a plywood door panel about 5 by 5 with a padlock on it. Nightshade took out a key, unlocked the padlock and slipped it through the hasp, then took out a thin solid washer and slipped it carefully through the crack in the door about 2 inches from the top right-hand corner. This is just a tad tricky, she said, slowly pulling the door open. Then she pulled from her pocket a thick wad of a putty or gum-like substance and clamped it down on the washer. It stuck and held the washer in place. The feds aren't completely dumb. The FBI figured we might want to go exploring in the shafts and vents, and so they put a photoelectric silent alarm on this door. Even the slight change in light that would come from opening the door in the dark would set it off. H. Covington. But Doc tried this washer and play clay trick and his meter thingy didn't read, so let's hope it's worked again, and they don't know we've opened this door. Inside the door was what appeared to be a steel dumbwaiter. Okay, I gather we're descending to the depths in this, said Cody, looking inside, but won't the electric motor make noise or set off some kind of alarm? No, we're not going up or down in it because you can't operate it from inside the elevator, she said. It wasn't meant to haul people. Look, let me first tell you what I've been doing. That day back when we left Centralia, you heard McGrew say there was one of our 3rd section agents here in the hotel? And you're in contact with that agent? Asked Cody. Bingo, she said. And Lisa said you were just another pretty face. For various reasons, it's proven impossible for that agent and General Barrow to get together and confer, even for a few moments. And the phones and the internet are out, so I've been acting as go-between. That hasn't been easy, since I have even less excuse for being seen with him or her, and I wanted to see if there was some way I could move around unseen like a rat in the wainscot. Wainscot? Asked Cody. My grandmother was English, and she used to read me Beatrix Potter stories before they gave her the hot shot. This hotel was built back in the 1950s, and it had one of the first examples of central air conditioning and heating in the Northwest. Nice, roomy ventilation ducts, or at least roomy for a skinny broad like me. My first inclination was just to do the old human fly trick and explore the ventilators as best I could, see if they're alarmed, so forth and so on, and see if there was any way I could move around the hotel unobserved that way. I'm glad I didn't mess around in the ducts, because that individual whose name I didn't mention told us that the main vents and the interstitial areas where the fans and heaters access the outside are all alarmed with motion sensors. Like I said, the feds aren't dumb, and they don't want anybody crawling around in there. But there's one thing they missed. Back when the hotel was first built, they also had some of the first automatic dishwashers. But in the 50s, those were big machines that made a lot of noise, and so they installed the dishwashers down in the basement. Each floor had a couple of dumbwaiter access doors for room leftovers, as well as the dining room and the big banquet room. These things carried dirty dishes down to the basement where they were unloaded and packed into the washers, and then stacked and sent back up when they were clean. Those shafts were later closed up when the basement dishwashers were removed, but they're still there, and they are accessible by a couple of service hatches like this one. The doors are alarmed, but not the shafts themselves, because the FBI were rushed, or lazy, or maybe it was just affirmative action incompetence. But these lifts are hydraulic, and so they're movable by hand. She pushed the dumbwaiter up and then grasped the bottom of it and lifted it up, slowly but without too much effort, leaving an open shaft with a cable. I'm able to get down in the old dishwasher room, which by lovely coincidence is now stacked high with old mattresses, and that makes it easy to drop down. The dumbwaiter shafts have ladder rungs in one side of the wall for service personnel, and you can push the lift up or pull it down after you as you climb up and down. She took out a flashlight from its hiding place and flashed it in, showing him the inset rungs bolted along the shaft. It's a piece of cake, so I put on my cat burglar outfit, not to be confused with my duckbill platypus costume, and I was able to lower myself down to the basement. Originally, I just wanted to see if I could somehow move around the hotel via these dumbwaiter shafts, and I can, a bit. I can get into the West Wing, for example, if I have to, and that means so can others of us, if need be. But this led to something else. There was a vent connecting that old dishwasher room down there, and their little war room next door. War room? Asked Cody. Our friend tipped me that the American delegation has taken to going down into the basement and whispering around a guttering candle in the hours of darkness, when the powers of evil are exalted, and the demon hound stalks the moor. Your grandmother read you Conan Doyle as well, did she? Asked Cody. No, dummy, that was Mrs. Jensen's English class at Hillside. You had her as well. Why the hell didn't they just have their bull sessions in one of their suites like we do? Wondered Cody. She shrugged. Hell if I know. Apparently they're just as paranoid about us as we are about them. Our source tells us Doc Doom has them all in a tizzy, because he's been able to really clean out our floor of all their surveillance crap, and they don't know what's going on. They think we're bugging them now, so they go down there and conspire in a hole. Anyway, I've been able to climb up on top of those dusty mattresses and lie there next to the ventilator and listen very nicely. I couldn't use a mic or a recorder because Doc told me that anything electrical might set off some kind of alarm, but I can pretty well hear what's going on. I've been down there 6 times in the past 2 weeks, including tonight, which was H. Covington. When I overheard them discussing those economic ambush clauses, they slipped into their treaty proposals. Plus a lot of other stuff I can't tell you about, but which has been passed on in code to the Army Council, which code they hopefully haven't broken. No problems until tonight just as I was leaving. And what was that problem? Asked Cody. Come on, I'll show you, she said. Hold the flashlight for me. She climbed into the shaft, grasping the rungs, and he held the light and watched her clamber down into the darkness like a monkey. It was only 1 floor, so it wasn't very far down, and he saw her hold up her hand, and he dropped her the flashlight. Then he eased into the shaft and climbed down carefully himself, feeling for each rung with his Doc Martens. The former dishwasher room was a large cinder-block chamber piled with musty-smelling mattresses and box springs, nor was it totally in darkness. A single 40-watt bulb glowed over the doorway, which presumably was one of those that led into the outside corridor, along which he and Barrow had traveled to meet with Walter Stanhope on the day of their arrival. Cody could see the air vent high in the far wall and the pile of mattresses where Emily told him she listened to the Americans and their plotting. That's the ventilator to the next room, she said, pointing up to one wall. It's dark now. They're not in there. She led him over to one corner where there was a single mattress on the floor, covered with old dirty sheets and mattress covers. She shifted the dusty cloth mound aside and flashed the light, and Cody saw that there was someone lying on the mattress. It was Susan Horowitz, the woman whom he had known for years as Leah Sapirstein. She was dressed in a casual pantsuit, pearl earrings gleaming against olive neck, jet black hair spread in a fan out on the dirty mattress, chin jutting high and left, neck snapped cleanly. Her eyes were blank and her mouth was open. The smell and the stained legs indicated that her bowels and bladder had emptied into her trousers as she died. "Well, isn't this another fine mess you've gotten us into, Ollie?" he said, shaking his head. "She walked in on me," said Nightshade. "I gave her a kung fu neck twist I saw in a movie, and damn if it didn't work. I don't think she was looking for me specifically. I think she was sneaking in here to listen in on what was going on in the next room, just like me." She slid a metal cylinder out of Susan's pocket. "This is some kind of high-end recording or transmitting device. Fortunately, it doesn't seem to have been on when she came in. My guess is she was working for someone." "Mossad?" "Quite possibly," agreed Cody. "Hadassahs often wear more than one hat. The Sapersteins go to Israel almost every year, and she could well have been recruited there. Hell, maybe they all were." "Look, Cody, I know you hate the Sapersteins, but this woman was technically your sister for a while," said Emily quietly. "I couldn't let her reveal that we'd found their secret meeting place and lose the listening post. I had no choice, but I'm sorry. She was part of your life and I took her away. A bad part. Don't sweat it. I won't." He looked dispassionately at his stepsister's corpse. "You're right, I did have Jensen for English Lit. Take thy fortune thou finds to be too busy as some danger. Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 4. Nightshade snorted. "Yeah, well, if you're Hamlet, I'm Ophelia. Rosemary's for remembrance. I'll wear my rue with a difference. Hey, Nani, and I'll go jump in the lake. Now, the reason I brought you down here was to ask you something." "What's that?" asked Cody. "Have you ever cut up a body?" "No," he replied thoughtfully. "Damn, where's Bobby Bells when you need him? I missed that class back in a company. Bells chopped up a couple, I know, but I'll tell you what I didn't miss. And that was Bells's ongoing rap on modern forensics and how not to get your ass jammed up by some CSI bimbo who thinks she's Agent Scully. You left something of yourself on her, fibers or skin or hair. You couldn't help it, and needless to say, you just had to cack a kike right in the middle of a small army of FBI agents and cops. But that is not the end of my daring do. With you two's past history, you know that you're the first one they'll come looking for when she's missed. For all we know, she may be missed already, if only in Secretary Stanhope's bed." "Yeah, I picked up on that," he said dryly. "They give those forensics classes in 3Sec too. Look, as a starting point, let's agree that she can't be found anywhere in our part of the hotel or connected with us at all, right?" "Agreed," said Cody. "That leaves us two choices," said Nightshade. "One, we dump her in the American part of the hotel or in the kitchen, someplace like that, and then act innocent. With this girl's apparently well-known kinks, and maybe her working for Israel as well, we won't necessarily be the only suspects. The second choice is that she just disappears, which is the best way, because then it's all up in the air and the impact on the conference. H. Covington isn't anywhere near as bad. Hey, maybe the slut ran off to Vegas with an MP or something, who knows? That won't fool the Phoebes for long, but as long as they merely suspect, it won't become that big an issue. They find a body, and the whole conference has problems." Agreed, said Cody. "But that means we have to either destroy her or stash her. This is a 5-star hotel, but I don't think they've got vats of acid anywhere for the convenience of homicidal guests. You know anything about the furnaces?" "I checked them out in my nocturnal wanderings, yes," said Nightshade in a low tone. "They're down the hall, which is patrolled by peacekeepers. Propane, but no access we could use to stuff a body into the flames. And if we even tried to open the boilers, we might break a line, get a gas leak, and end up sitting on the moon along with the rest of the hotel. There's all kinds of places around the grounds we could bury her, if we had time and a nice foggy night, but the hotel is chock-a-block, and even if we could get her outside, we'd be seen by somebody in 60 seconds, and probably end up with our picture on the front page of the National Enquirer hauling a dead body around. We can't bury her in here because the floor is concrete. We can't leave her in here under some mattresses or in the old dishwasher well, because the Americans meet next door almost every night, and after a couple of days she's going to get ripe enough for somebody to get a whiff through the ventilator. Plus the peacekeepers do check this room periodically. I've had to duck out of sight a couple of times. Even hefting her out of here up one of those dumbwaiter shafts is going to be hard to do, at least hard to do quietly, which is one reason I called you in to help." "One reason?" asked Cody. "Well, There was also our slurp session out by the vending machines, said Nightshade. A girl needs some romance in her life. What about cutting her up? She asked again. There's a maintenance room down the hall with tools, including some hacksaws and hatchets, and some heavy-duty garbage bags. It would be a bit tricky getting in and out with the blue berets around and about, but because they go up and down periodically, the corridor doesn't have motion detectors, so we might could get in and get some stuff and get back here. We can do the job down in that well where the dishwasher was. It's got drains in it. Hold off on the hatchet, Carrie Nation, said Cody, sitting down on a mattress and putting his chin on his hand in thought. I'm not sure subdivision is the way to go here, and I'm not just being squeamish. For one thing, neither of us have ever dismembered a human being before, and I don't think it's a job we want to try for the first time in the dark with only a flashlight and working under a time constraint. We wouldn't be able to do much of a cleanup job down here in the dark, and the minute some federal CSI dweeb throws his black light in there, up comes the bloodstains. For another thing, if we want to make her disappear, we're multiplying our problem if we cut her up, because instead of one body, we then have to make 8 or 10 separate parcels disappear, plus the mess involved in dissecting her. They find one bag of giblets, and the whole game is up. No, we need to stash the whole body someplace where it won't be detected by sight or smell. Getting back to Hamlet, we don't want anyone nosing her as they go into the lobby, or finding her dead body under the bed like this was some tourist motel in Florida. Wherever we put her, it's going to have to be up one of those old service shafts, said Nightshade. Hence my need for a good strong set of male shoulders. We couldn't get from the door to one end of that corridor or the other without a Swede in a blue beret spotting us. Okay, where do the shafts go? Asked Cody. One over there goes up to the kitchen, one over there goes to the pump room, there's the one we came down to our floor, and one around the corner goes up to the west wing, said Nightshade. I'd say stash her in a ventilator duct, but not only would that blow the aroma of rotting Jew all over the hotel in a couple of days, but there's those damned motion detectors the FBI put in there. Okay, the one up to the kitchen, where does it come out? Asked Cody. A kind of alcove. You're thinking stash her in a freezer? I thought of that. Number 1, the kitchen has security cameras, although no motion detectors, to stop the staff from stealing food, I guess. Great country where people have to steal food, eh? Les Miserables and white people are all Jean Valjean. Yeah, well, we're sitting in a whole hotel full of Inspector Javerts. Enough with the literary illusions, damn it. We need to dump this stiff. Emily continued. Number 2, that kitchen is crowded all day long, and people go in and out of the freezers all the time. In fact, she looked at her watch by the flashlight. In another couple of hours, the first shift crew will show up to start fixing breakfast for us hard-working diplomats. We need to figure out what to do, and go on and do it. Actually, I was wondering what they had up there by way of meat grinders and slicers, mused Cody. Would they really notice a few more packs of frozen cold cuts, or a couple more sides hanging in a corner in the walk-in? You. Now that's not merely silly, it's gross, she exclaimed. H. Covington, I once saw a loading dock out back there. Where is the door to that? To the right from the dumbwaiter shaft, said Nightshade. You may be onto something there. If I remember correctly, that's about the only blind spot in the kitchen, blocked from the cameras by the head chef's little office. I did some sneaking around in there when I first found these shafts, but I had to watch those panning CCTVs. Is the door alarmed? He asked. I think so, yes, she answered. Crap. There goes my idea of putting her in the dumpster, sighed Cody. Or the trash compactor, said Nightshade in sudden excitement. Cody, they've got one of those big long container-type trash compactors. Once it gets full, a truck comes along, hooks up, hauls it away, and another truck backs an empty container in and drops it off. We're using up so much food and generating so much kitchen garbage that they do this every day, and the truck comes and replaces the compactor at about 4 a.m. or so. If we can just get her out there on the dock, all we have to do is get her kosher carcass inside the compactor, and it will be smushed flat and hauled away to a landfill. Brilliant. Past an alarmed door that will go off if we open it, said Cody. Well, no use just sitting here. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Show me the shaft and I'll go up and take a look. Is the dumbwaiter door padlocked from the outside? No, they still use the kitchen dumbwaiter sometimes, so it's not locked, and there's no alarm on the door. FBI seems to have missed that one too. When you get up there, just push the elevator up far enough and push on the door. A minute later, Cody carefully eased himself out into the large and modern kitchen. It was dimly lit and smelled of fresh mopped floor, and several unseen electrical things hummed discordantly. There was the freezer and what appeared to be a newly built small cubbyhole office, and there were no closed-circuit cameras that he could see. Evidently, this small area was indeed a blind spot. He slipped down the right-hand corridor to where several large plastic-wheeled garbage tips stood by a wide double door. He carefully examined the door and found that it was indeed alarmed. He also saw that there was an alarm switch, no doubt intended for the mutual convenience of security guards and late workers, and that it was in the off position. He was back down in the basement a minute later. "I can't believe our luck," he said excitedly. "The door alarm has a manual switch and whoever was out there last forgot to turn it on. And whoever's running security board upstairs must not have noticed, or else they just don't give a damn. God, are these feds incompetent or what? Well, we've been here 10 weeks, and while there's been a lot of yelling in the conference session and a lot of drunk reporters, it's actually been pretty sedate. We haven't killed anybody before tonight, so they probably just got slack. You know, I've noticed that ever since white people started standing up for themselves and fighting back, little things like that happen," commented Nightshade. "Other volunteers have mentioned it as well. Our luck as a people seems to have changed. Anytime we need that fall of the dice, that toss of a coin, all other things being equal, it seems to go our way. Fortune really does favor the brave, I guess. Right, enough midnight metaphysics. Let's get Susie Q recycled. What are those?" "Supersized garbage bags I grabbed from a shelf from the kitchen," said Cody. "That way if she's found, hopefully they'll think she was done in the kitchen and divert their attention away from this room." They wrapped Susan's body in the garbage bags by sliding one over her feet and another over her head, then repeating the process for a double bagging. Before they did so, Nightshade asked, "Do you think we should take that recorder thing? Doc might be able to figure out how it works, what she was doing and who she was working for." "Negative," said Cody. "They find one item of hers on any of us, we have problems." They lashed the garbage bags around her body with her own belt, and then slid the whole body into a king-size mattress cover big enough to act like a sack and give them something to grasp as carrying handles. "Okay, now comes the hard part. Sure there's no way we can risk using that dumbwaiter?" They picked up Susan's corpse and carried her over to the shaft. "This is going to be a bitch," said Cody, staring up into the darkness. "One of us is going to have to stand up there and pull, and one of us stay down here and lift and push." Nightshade sighed. "We could probably manhandle her up the rungs with you pushing and me pulling, but I'm starting to get worried about time. Look, I'll go up and get out into the kitchen. Then I'll push the car down as far as I can, and you haul the dumbwaiter lift down, put her in it, turn this dial to K and hit the blue button. Our luck has held so far. Let's just hope nobody hears, or else they think it's kitchen crew if they do." "Does the damned thing even work?" asked Cody. "We're going to find out," she said. "If it does, I'll pull her out and you make sure it's turned off and then come up by the rungs." The procedure she described was clumsy, but it worked. The dumbwaiter whirred and groaned, but it had been greased recently, and it hauled Susan's body up to H.A. Covington, the kitchen, without making all that much noise. By the time Cody got up onto the rungs and pushed the car up with his arm, Emily had the mattress cover off and on the floor, and they lifted the black plastic-wrapped package and its gruesome contents into one of the heavy gray plastic garbage tips. They pushed the tip to the door, checked to see that the alarm was indeed off, opened it, and chalked both doors open with little rubber wedges that appeared to be there for that very purpose. Outside, a gibbous autumn moon shone down, low in the sky. Perfect weather for skullduggery. "Come out with me and be prepared to do another cuddle if we see a camera or a guard," Emily said. "We'll tell them we're determined to do it in every room in the hotel, including on the conference room table." Cody stepped outside and looked around. "Damn, it's gotten colder," he said. "I wouldn't mind getting my hands under your bra right now." The trash compactor loomed before them at the edge of the dock, which in turn was at the bottom of a ramp somewhat recessed into the building. Cody didn't see anyone. He propped open the trash compactor's top cover with a broom handle leaning up against it, evidently for that very purpose. "Hey, this is a recycling receptacle," he said. I don't know if we're supposed to put organic material in here, as long as it's not plastic or steel, she said. Our Jap is neither. I think she'll smush up into jelly real good. Between them, they hauled out the tip and dumped the body in. The trash compactor was half full of cardboard and paper waste, much of it gooey and soggy with food and food byproducts. It was a large steel container, and Cody jumped down inside it. "Give me the flashlight," he said. He cleared out a space as far up in the container as he could, dragged his former sister's body forward, and buried her in cartons and paper wrapping and glop, so that the black plastic bags could not be seen. Then Nightshade leaned down, held out her hand, and helped pull him out. "Do you think we dare push our luck and start it up and compact all that crap?" she asked. "We can't," said Cody. "There's an ignition key somewhere inside the office that goes in that switch, and we don't have time to find it. Plus, the noise would certainly attract one of the MP security patrols. Lucky we're down in this trough between the buildings. This should work if our luck holds. The morning crew will dump all kinds of breakfast refuse in here. It will still be dark, and somebody will run a crush before the truck comes to haul this one away. But we need to get the hell out of here." They snuck back inside, pulling the tip after them, and closed the door. Nightshade picked the mattress cover off the floor and dropped it down the shaft. Then they were inside and back down into the basement. Within several more minutes, they were back up in the south wing janitorial closet, and after a quick peep into the corridor, down the hall and back into Barrow's executive suite. Cody smelled like garbage. Barrow and Jane Chenault were sitting on the sofa side by side watching CNN. He looked up at them. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Fine, sir," said Cody, although he was by no means sure it was fine, or even if Barrow knew exactly what had happened. There was still a lot that could go wrong. "I heard a rumor that the Americans are going to stage some kind of incident tomorrow, sir," said Nightshade. "They're going to pretend to be very upset over something, more so than usual." "Yeah, well, they get upset over a lot of things." "Nothing we can do about it," replied Barrow with a shrug, cupping his hand to his ear. He had never fully believed that as good as Doc Doom was with electronic gadgetry, he had managed to clear the entire floor of listening devices. He had a yellow legal pad in his hand and wrote, "How bad will it get?" Nightshade said, "God, that Paulus Ingrams is the ugliest coon on TV." She wrote, "With luck they won't find her." Barrow stared at the screen. "We've let them drag this out too long. They're talking and saying nothing, and I'm tired of it. We've been stuck in this hotel so long we're starting to eat one another like mice in a cage. I'm going to talk to Lodge tomorrow and tell him that we need to wind this up one way or the other."